Hello everyone, my name is Jeanette and I work for Houston Audubon, and today we're going to talk about dendrochronology. Dendrochronology is a really big word, but if we break it down, I'm sure you'll be able to understand what it is. So dendro, the first part of the word, is a Greek word that means trees or related to trees. So of course we're going to be talking about trees. And chronology, you may have heard that word before. It means the order of past events. So dendrochronology is using trees to look at the order of past events. So first, we need to talk about tree growth, because that's how we're going to learn about these past events, looking at tree growth. So I'm going to show you some different ways that trees grow. So trees grow in two types of ways. The first way is they grow up, right? We call that primary growth. This is when the tree elongates its twigs from the buds. And right now we can see that happening. If you go out and look at some trees, on the end of their twigs, you might see some green, bright green growth. The twig is brand new. It's springtime. Trees are growing right now. And that green twig is the new growth for this year. It's not hardened yet. It's not brown or gray like the other twigs. It's brand new, fresh growth. The other way that trees grow is outward. We call this secondary growth. This is when the tree adds wood to its trunk. And when that tree adds wood to its trunk, we see something like this. These are tree cookies. No, you can't eat them. But it's what we call a cross-section of a tree. If we were to cut a tree and look at it like this is what we would see. We would see that secondary growth for each year that the tree puts on more growth. Now, if we look at these tree cookies, we see alternating colors on these rings. Some of them are light, some of them are dark, right? These are two different times that the tree is growing. So the tree grows at two different times of the year. It grows in the springtime and in the late summer, early fall. These lighter rings represent that springtime growth. We call it early wood. In the springtime, things are growing fast. There's lots of fresh nutrients, good rain, lots of sunshine. The trees grow really fast. And when they're growing, those cells that they're making are very large and they're very spaced out. So that is why these rings are very lightly colored. In the late summer and early fall, the tree growth starts slowing down. We call this late wood. So the cells that form these rings are smaller because they're growing slower, and they're a lot closer together, allowing for that darker color. More dense cells create a darker color. So by looking at these tree rings, scientists and even you can tell what kind of weather and conditions that this tree grew in. And that's what I'm talking about when we're learning about the past events, is we're learning about the past events that this tree has experienced, weather and growing wise. So when you're looking at a tree cookie, there are many things that you can determine from just looking at this tree cookie. For one, you can determine where the oldest part of the tree is. Can you guess where the oldest part is? It's right in the middle, right? Trees grow from the inside out, right? Not from the outside in. So the oldest part of the tree is going to be right at the center. We call that the pith, and that's this right here. So as the tree gets older, it puts on more rings. So by counting these rings, just the dark ones, because remember I said the tree grows twice a year, so if you counted all the rings, it would be way too many. But if you counted all the dark rings from the pith all the way out to the bark, you would be able to tell how old this tree is. So scientists can figure out how old trees are and then determine what the weather was like each year that this tree was growing in that area. You can tell things like the tree's water supply. Was it a rainy year? Did the tree get a lot of water? Or was there a drought and the tree didn't get much water? You can tell if the tree had a lot of sunlight. Was it growing good or not so much? You can also tell the density of the forest that this tree was in. You can make a guess of how many trees and how close those trees were to your tree that you are looking at, just all by looking at these rings. Pretty amazing. So let's look at how to read our tree rings. So this tree grew very well. If you look, the rings are very evenly spaced, and there's not much variation in them. This is what we would call good growth. This tree had enough water, enough sunlight, enough nutrients. It wasn't too crowded. It grew very nice and even throughout all the years that it was growing. It was a very good tree cookie. If your tree has some narrow rings where the rings get really tight together at one point, this could indicate that there was a drought. There wasn't enough water for the tree. It wasn't allowed to grow as much as it should have been able to. It could also indicate insect infestation. Maybe caterpillars ate all of the leaves on that tree crown, and the tree was not able to make enough food to grow as well as it should have because they had no leaves. This could also indicate root damage. Maybe there was a sidewalk that got put in next to this tree, or maybe a house was built next to this tree. Any kind of construction that breaks into the ground could have cut one of those roots and therefore cut off a whole channel of nutrients and water that was flowing into that tree, kind of hindering it from growing as well as it should have. Let's look at another example. This uneven growth. So the pith is not always at the middle of the tree. Sometimes it's off to the side. This could indicate that the tree was leaning. Maybe something was growing next to it, another tree. Maybe it was next to a fence or a building. Or maybe it was on a slope or a really windy area where the wind was constantly blowing on that one side. It was only able to grow on the other side. So uneven growth looks like that. If there's a dark spot on one of your rings, there may have been a forest fire that your tree survived. The fire maybe burned the outer bark at the time, and then over the years the tree healed that wound and covered it up, and you can no longer see it unless you look at the tree cookie and see that scar from the forest fire. Forest fires are actually very important in lots of ecosystems. It opens up the understory, allowing for new growth, wildlife to have easier access through the forest, and it is very beneficial in many ways to not only plants but also to wildlife. So forest fires are not always a bad thing. Another thing that you can look for is a dark line through a few rings, or it might be a break. This indicates that there was a branch there at one point and it eventually died off. Trees self-prune. This means that once they get to a certain height, they'll start dropping their lower limbs. They'll stop funneling nutrients to those lower limbs to be able to funnel nutrients up so they can keep growing up and won't have to waste nutrients on these lower, smaller branches that aren't really doing much. They might get shaded out and might not be doing much. So let's look at this tree cookie and see if we can figure out how old this tree is and if it experienced any conditions that might have hindered its growth. So to count a tree's age, you're going to look at the dark rings. And remember, you're going to start at the middle. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. So this tree cookie is 14 years old. And if I'm looking at it, it gets a little wider on this side compared to this side. So I would say maybe for a few years, maybe there was more trees around it on this side of it as it was growing, and it kind of shaded it out. But on this side, there wasn't as many trees, so it was able to grow more on this side. But eventually, it looks like these trees on this side died off, or maybe were cut down. It was able to even out its growth again. So this tree grew very, very well. I don't see any fire scars. I don't see any branch die-offs. It's very even growth. Ooh, over here it got a little skinny. Maybe not so much water, maybe not so much sunlight this year. But other than that, this tree grew very, very well. So hopefully you are able to go out. You can buy tree cookies online, or you can go out and cut a branch or a small tree yourself and make your own tree cookie. And you can do your own dendrochronology right at home. You can examine your tree cookie, see how old your tree is, and then see if it has endured any drought, any lack of sunshine, maybe an insect infestation. Did it survive a forest fire? Maybe not in your backyard, but you can always look at these tree cookies and learn so much about a tree's history and a tree's past. It's really amazing being able to look into the past through these tree cookies. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you get to do your own dendrochronology at home soon. Thanks for tuning in.